This conference is being recorded. Cette conférence est enregistrée.
All participants, please stand by. Your conference is ready to begin. À tous les participants, merci d'avoir patienté. Votre conférence est prête à débuter. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third independent review of the National Defence Act Tabling Press Conference. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Daniel Minden. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue à l'appel conférence dépôt du troisième examen indépendant de la loi sur la défense nationale, conférence de presse. J'aimerais maintenant céder la parole à Daniel Minden. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's press conference on the receipt of the third independent review of the National Defence Act. Today we are joined by the Honourable Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defence, the Honourable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Anita Vandenbelt, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence, Lieutenant General Wayne Eyre, Acting Chief of the Defence Staff, Jody Thomas, Deputy Minister of National Defence, and Rear Admiral Geneviève Bernatchez, Judge Advocate General of the Canadian Armed Forces. Bonjour. Merci d'avoir rejoint cette conférence de presse sur la réception du troisième examen indépendant de la loi sur la défense nationale. Aujourd'hui, nous avons avec nous l'honorable Harjit Sajjan, ministre de la Défense nationale, l'honorable David Lametti, ministre de la Justice et procureur général, Anita Vandenbelt, secrétaire parlementaire du ministre de la Défense nationale, le lieutenant général Wayne Eyre, chef d'état-major de la Défense par intérim, Jody Thomas, sous-ministre de la Défense nationale, et la contre-amirale Geneviève Bernatchez, juge avocat général des Forces armées canadiennes. We will begin with remarks from Minister Sajjan and Parliamentary Secretary Vandenbelt, and then proceed with a question period. Minister Sajjan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. On behalf of the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces and all Canadians, I want to thank the Honourable Maurice J. Fish, former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, for completing the third independent review of the National Defence Act. When I asked Justice Fish in November 2020 to begin this independent review, he was tasked with analyzing the military justice system, including its structure. We knew that it needed to be updated. We knew that the system could be updated more responsive to the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces and more reflective of the civilian justice system. It is why I asked Justice Fish to provide a deep and far-reaching examination of the military justice system, including the military police. This is the most comprehensive independent review of the military justice system since the 1990s, and Justice Fish's recommendations provide one of the largest overhauls of the National Defence Act and Canadian military justice system in recent memory. And the defense team welcomes Justice Fish's findings. And that is why I have accepted the 107 recommendations in principle. I have directed the review of all the recommendations we received, and we will implement them as quickly and efficiently as we can. In the short term, the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence will implement 36 of the recommendations. And while some of the recommendations will require greater consultation and analysis, the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces are committed to working with Minister Lametti and the Department of Justice to see how we can move forward to undertake the largest changes to the military justice system in a generation. We will do this in consultation with Justice Arbour, Justice Fish, experts, stakeholders, and most importantly, the survivors. I also commit to establishing a thorough and detailed implementation plan on recommendations that need further review, substantial resources, or significant legislative and regulatory changes. We will share this plan with the Standing Committee on National Defence this fall, along with an update on the work already done on Justice Fish's recommendations to date. And going forward, we will provide a twice-yearly report on our progress to the Standing Committee on National Defence to provide greater transparency. This report comes at a critical time. For the past few months, we've heard far too many heartbreaking experiences of Canadian Armed Forces members and Department of National Defence who have been impacted by hateful, hurtful, and harmful behaviors in our ranks. Too many accounts of appalling abuses of power, And we know that more work needs to be done so that we can have meaningful and lasting cultural change. We know we must do better, and we will do better. Justice Fish's recommendations will be essential to our ongoing work to strengthen the military justice system. We want to ensure our people have a voice when interacting with the military justice system, that they have confidence and trust in the process, and that they are treated fairly and respectfully at all times. We are determined to build trust in the system, support and protect our people, and create a safer, inclusive environment where they can contribute and thrive to the fullest. And we are already starting to implement recommendations that can be done in the short term. For example, recommendation number 72 speaks to the implementing a program that provides free independent legal advice to victims of sexual misconduct. This was funded in Budget 2021, and work has already started. We understand that to achieve the deep and lasting change we must go beyond just the military justice system and examine all the elements of our organization and culture. We need whole-scale change that is focused on building a defense team that feels safe and supported when they come to work. That's why we've asked Justice Louise Arbour to conduct a new comprehensive external review that will complement Justice Fish's work and look deeply at the culture of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence. She will expand upon this and previous reviews and recommendations and help guide us as we implement these recommendations and institute lasting reforms. Taking a broader look at how and why sexual misconduct continues to persist in our military and what we can do to prevent it. Justice Arbour will examine our policies, procedures, and practices in areas like incident reporting, military justice, training, and leadership selection. I've spoken with Justice Arbour. She will take into consideration many of the recommendations provided by Justice Fish and provide her own recommendations on how we can better support those who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. She'll also offer both interim and final recommendations to bring about positive change, including an independent and external reporting system for those who have experienced sexual misconduct. We look forward to receiving her recommendations so we can implement them so that we continue to make the needed and lasting changes. The new Chief Professional Conduct and Culture, Lieutenant General Carrion, and her team will help us unify and deepen our efforts and initiatives to strengthen accountability and drive cultural transformation across the defense team. Part of that transformation is focused on implementing Bill C-77 provisions to modernize the National Defence Act, including the new Declaration of Victims' Rights. This work will be informed by Justice Fish's report. We know that we have a lot of work to do to create a culture of dignity and respect for every member of the defense team, and we are committed to doing this work. We must listen and learn from our people, past and present, to bring about culture change and eliminate sexual harassment, sexual assault, and abuse of power from our institution. We must remain transparent and accountable to them, to Parliament, and most of all to Canadians. Justice Fish's report offers clear and constructive recommendations to ensure that our military justice system remains aligned with the civilian system and better support our Canadian Armed Forces members. I want to thank him once again for his insights. And I will commit to him, to the Canadian Armed Forces members, the Department of National Defence employees, and all Canadians that we will pursue these goals to bring about the culture change that is needed in our institution. We will make sure that every member of the defense team feels safe, valued, and supported by their colleagues and leaders. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour. Comme le ministre Sajjan l'a souligné,
as Minister Sajjan has underscored, Justice Fish's report comes at a pivotal time for the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense. Among the principles the defense team stands for are inclusion, respect, and dignity for all people. These are the same values they are committed to protecting and promoting around the world. But too often, the lived experiences of defense team members are not in alignment with these values. Recent allegations have eroded the trust team members have in each other and the trust Canadians have in their armed forces. There has to be zero tolerance for sexism, racism, misogyny, or any other form of hateful belief or conduct among members of the defense team. That's why we're setting the conditions for top-to-bottom culture change through several lines of effort, including launching a new independent external comprehensive review under the leadership of Justice Louise Arbour, appointing Lieutenant General Carignan as the new Chief Professional Conduct and Culture to help drive cultural transformation, and continuing to implement Bill C-77 provisions to modernize the National Defense Act, including the new Declaration of Victims' Rights. These efforts build on important progress we've already made. Responding to the recommendations in Justice Deschamps' 2015 report, promoting diversity and inclusion as core institutional values, integrating gender-based analysis plus across all policies, programs, and services, providing a full range of support services to affected CAF members, including through the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, and streamlining the grievance process. These are critical steps, but we know we need to keep pressing forward. Justice Fish's review was launched independently of the sexual misconduct issues our military is facing. The National Defense Act requires regular independent reviews of provisions within the Act, but his findings complement our efforts to resolve these issues. They will help focus and amplify the important work we're doing to build a more inclusive work environment and a culture of dignity and respect. For this review, Justice Fish was tasked with examining specified provisions of the National Defense Act and their operation. Within this scope are the military justice system, including the Code of Service Discipline, military policing and police oversight, and military grievances and external review of grievances. The review and recommendations help ensure that related policies, processes, and operational practices remain relevant and accountable. Justice Fish was able to act on the most complete information and draw the most relevant and meaningful conclusions through access to the appropriate personnel, CAF members and DND employees, members and staff of the Military Grievances External Review Committee, the Military Police Complaints Commission, and the Office of the DND CAF Ombudsman. Through this robust and rigorous review, Justice Fish has presented 107 recommendations, most of which relate to the military justice system. We accept the vast majority of these recommendations in principle, and we have already begun work to fully realize the intent of Justice Fish's report. In the short term, we will implement the recommendations that we can put in place quickly and efficiently, 36 of them. As the Minister stated, Recommendation 72 speaks to implementing a program that provides free, independent legal advice to victims of sexual misconduct. This was funded in Budget 2021, and work has already begun. Other recommendations will require additional analysis, resources, or legislative and regulatory changes to ensure we are addressing them properly and effectively. As the Minister noted, we will present our plan to implement these recommendations to the Standing Committee on National Defence this fall and provide updates on our progress twice a year. Regular independent reviews help us make sure our military justice system remains relevant, modern, and reflective of Canadian values. So we are truly thankful for Justice Fish's work on this report. His insights and advice will be invaluable at this transformational time in the history of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence. And his recommendations will inform our efforts to ensure that the defense team emerges from the current crisis a better, stronger, and more effective institution that reflects the Canadian people and the values we all cherish. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. We will now move into a question and answer period. Journalists will be given the opportunity to ask one question and one follow-up. Please indicate who your question is for. We
will now go on to the question period. Journalists will be able to ask one question and one follow-up. Please indicate to whom you're addressing your question.
Thank you. Merci. Our first question, notre première question, is from Lee Bertium with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, this message is for Minister Sajjan, or this question, sorry, this question is from Minister Sajjan. You said that you have accepted the recommendations in principle. Some have noted that that was exactly the same language that was used by the previous government and the military in response to the Deschamps report, and which has raised concerns that basically these recommendations are not going to be implemented. So what can you say to those who see this talk about in principle and are fearful that this will actually not lead to the change that has been called for?
Lee, first of all, thank you very much for the question. And some of our members who are hearing this do have the right to be the right to ask this question. But one thing I can assure all our members: the reason this is different, when we form a government and we put our defense policy together, we put an emphasis on looking after our people. And that's why in chapter number 1 of our defense policy, we made that an absolute focus. So when it comes to any issues when looking after our people, whether it's misconduct, sexual misconduct, this is something that we take absolutely seriously. Now, in hindsight, obviously we could have and should have done a lot more. But when we learn of anything that comes forward, we want to be able to take that action. And this is what today's about, is the military justice review that Justice Fish has done, has provided us with concrete recommendations, and more importantly, to evolve our military justice system to support our Canadian Armed Forces members and put confidence towards it. Sometimes we have to be able to look at the various things that we are going through to look at what changes are needed to be made. And I'm very happy to see, and I was very happy to read the report myself a number of times, where it actually, Justice Fish went through some very concrete, thoughtful process to come to those recommendations. And so I'm committed to this. More importantly, we're going to be creating an implementation plan and make it transparent that we will report to NDDN or the committee so that they can see the progress. But most importantly, this is about making sure that we create an inclusive environment in the Canadian Armed Forces, and the implementation plan that we'll create is very similar to what we did in implementing the defense policy, a concrete plan with progress reports that'll be very transparent.
And as a follow-up, I'd like to know just kind of what role you and the government, the political side, will play in making sure that these recommendations are implemented? I'm basically just trying to get a sense of where does the buck stop here? Is it with the military and the responsibility will be on them to implement, or are you going to be taking an active role and the government taking an active role in making sure that these recommendations are implemented?
This is something, Lee, our government has been committed to making sure that we have tackled these type of systemic issues, whether systemic racism, sexual misconduct, not just in the military, but wider government in our institutions as well. So yes, not only from a government perspective, we'll be taking an active role, but inside the Canadian Armed Forces, I'll be taking an active role to making sure the implementation is going to be done. And so what we're looking at, not just the Canadian Armed Forces, as the Deputy Minister who stands beside me is absolutely committed to making sure that we have an inclusive environment for the civilian employees in the Department of National Defence. So we will create an implementation plan that will be designed very similar to how we create the implementation of the defence policy, with a governance process that works its way up to me, and more importantly, where I, as a minister, will report to our Defence Committee and to parliamentarians on all Canadians through them.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Kevin Gallagher with CTV National News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon. My question is for Minister Sajjan. Minister, a big chunk of this report does focus on victims, and certainly for survivors of sexual assault and sexual misconduct in the military, there's a real hesitance to come forward. There's fear of reprisals, and this lays out some recommendations to do that. So what's the timeline for implementing some of these changes, whether it be having military police handle the investigations or other aspects of involving the SMRC? What's the timeline to implement some of these, or specifically the victims' rights stuff that's in here? What's the timeline for implementing these measures that will allow the survivors of sexual misconduct and sexual assault to feel more empowered and safer when they come forward with complaints?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's absolutely crucial that we move as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that we get this right. The recommendations that Justice Fish has put forward, you can tangibly see the confidence that it can build, but it will require a significant amount of work. We're moving immediately on the recommendations that don't require legislative or regulatory changes. But we will be putting a plan together that we will present to our National Defence Committee, where we will then update on a regular basis. So I'll leave it to, if our Judge Advocate General or Minister Lametti would want to provide any comments too in terms of the timeline it takes when it comes to some of the legislative changes that might need to take place.
So specifically the recommendations about sexual misconduct, unless someone was going to follow up there, I can allow them to, 65 and 66, they're not on the list of recommendations that are going to be implemented or that are being committed to start the implementation right now. Is that, you're saying that those ones for sexual misconduct need some type of legislative action?
So we are going to be moving we'll be working not only within the department, but we'll be working with Justice Fish and working, putting together whatever structures are going to be needed. There are some areas where even Justice Fish is, we have to put working groups together. However, there are certain aspects that we will move as quickly as possible. We are committed to implementing the recommendations, but there's a lot of work behind that needs to be done. The timeline itself for the legislative change does take time, but we do need to get this right. And I've asked Justice Fish to work with us as we look at working towards the implementations. I wanted to make sure that we are actually meeting Justice Fish's intent on the recommendations, and he has offered up his support in this regard.
Thank you. If I could just add to that question, there are a number of complexities. We've done a great deal on the civilian side with respect to the victims of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and such, sexual assault, and we are continuing to invest in that. the transition to better protection within the military system, or the transfer out of the military system of some victims, is complex, because there are investigative questions, there are prosecutorial questions, and then there are questions of hearing. So we're committed to working with Mr. Sajjan, the Department of National Defence, to make that work, and we're committed to doing so diligently.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Jacques Galland with the Toronto Star. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, hi. My question is for Minister Sajjan, and it's relating to recommendation 68 that I noticed was not identified as one of the recommendations to be implemented in the short term, that until the Declaration of Victims' Rights is brought into force, that sexual assault should be referred to civilian authorities. Why isn't that being implemented in the short term? Is there a specific reason? Does that require legislative changes?
Well, first, we have to be mindful of the independence of the investigative process in its current form that it's at. As a political figure, we can't interfere with the current process that we have right now. So the independence of the investigative process by the military police, and also independence of the prosecutor in terms of how they look at trying things. But this is where things can only change if the discretion is taken away. If we go down the legislative process, that's why we have to be able to do that work to make those changes. And I believe that the Provost Marshal will have more to say on this, but we're absolutely committed to Justice Fish's recommendations in this regard, to making sure that there is an efficiency for justice for the survivors that come forward.
Thanks. And my follow-up is also for the Minister. We've heard from the current Ombudsman, Mr. Lick, that his office already has the mandate to be an independent oversight body of the military, that all his office needs really is to be able to report directly to Parliament. He's described this as a relatively simple thing to do, and that it does not require another independent review. So I'm wondering why not make that change? Why not allow the Ombudsman to report directly to Parliament?
Like I said, everything is currently on the table, but we want to make sure that we get this right. We want to make sure that just because we can have a external body report to Parliament doesn't possibly can fix things. I want to make sure that we go through a proper analysis. This is why I've asked Justice of the Board to take a look at what an external system will be needed. Once she conducts her work, we'll have a much better idea that will have a proper independence when it comes to people coming forward with any type of complaints of misconduct. But more importantly, it will be completely outside of the chain of command. We need to make also possibly organizational and regulatory changes to give certain powers as well. But this is the work that Madame Arbour will be doing, and so. What I want to do is not trying to point in any direction of which we were going to go. I want to allow Madame Arbour to be able to do that work so that we get this right.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you, merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Mercedes Stevenson with Global News. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi, thank you so much for taking our questions. My question is for you, Minister Sajjan. In the report, Justice Fish talks about how the military justice system has been notoriously resistant to criticism or change from the outside. Are you willing, as the Defence Minister, to push these changes through, in particular where it comes to sexual misconduct? Because over and over, we've heard the system is going to change, and yet we see right in this report that 6 years after your government has come in, really nothing has changed for victims of sexual misconduct.
To answer your question very simply, Mercedes, absolutely, yes. We're absolutely committed to this. This is why when Justice Fish launched his review, we wanted to take a look at the changes that were needed. Over the years, as we looked at some of the complexities that we were also dealing with, we knew that we have to conduct a National Defence Act review. And Justice Fish's work has really done, and his team have done a phenomenal job of looking at these things. So we're absolutely committed to this. We need to reform the military justice system so that it builds confidence for our Canadian Armed Forces members.
And just as a follow-up, why have you made the decision, at least it appears you've made the decision, to keep sexual misconduct within the military justice system instead of removing it and placing it with civilian investigators and prosecutors, as a number of allied countries have decided to do after facing similar problems inside their forces?
I would say that this is something that we'll be actually examining closely. Absolutely, the recommendations that Justice Fish has brought forward will be, given the current system that we have now, it's the independence of the investigative body, the military police, to make that decision. But we will be doing the necessary work to see what direction we needed to take it to. For example, the legislative changes. If there is legislative change for this, as we work with Justice Fish and his team, this is the direction that will go. The goal for this is to making sure that we give confidence not only to our members, but we want to make sure that we have efficiency in the system as well. As you know, that the Canadian Armed Forces is spread across the country. So we want to make sure we look at all the complexities so that we can get this right. And I just want to pass it on to if Minister Lametti or the JAG have any further comments to this.
Thank you, Minister. I just wanted to echo again, Mercedes, what the Minister had said and what I'd said in the answer to the previous question, which is this is a course of action that has a great deal of merit, but it is complex, and so we need to do it right. Not only we obviously have to protect the victim and make sure the victim's rights are protected and vindicated, but we also need to create an environment where victims are comfortable coming forward and a set of procedures where they're comfortable moving forward, and also preventing against unnecessary delays in the transition. Again, there are policing decisions, investigative decisions, prosecutorial decisions, and then the court decisions themselves, the procedure provisions. So there is complexity here. We're not afraid of that, but it is something we are committed to, but it will take time.
And on my part, if I may, what I want to indicate is that, Ms. Stevenson, I fully acknowledge your comment that in the past, military justice actors have been very reluctant to change. This is true. This is something that has been observed. However, I would like to put on the record that as the current Judge Advocate General, I fully embrace the recommendations made by Justice Fish. They are incredibly important. They must be looked at. They must be implemented to their fullest extent as much as possible. This goes to the very heart of the ongoing credibility and legitimacy of the military justice system and its ability to meet the needs of those who use it and those who are impacted by it.
Thank you. Merci. This concludes today's press conference. Merci tout le monde. Bon après-midi.